Ready to open the hood? UseTool for the tutorials.
And for car parts, the right idea is the Mr. Auto app. Easy, fast, and with better prices than on the website.
You can find the bulk clutch kit used in the video exclusively on the Mr. Auto website and in the link in the description. Turn your engine off, pull up the handbrake, pull on the bonnet release lever and open the bonnet. To carry out this operation, you have to remove the battery. To do this, we recommend watching the video How to Replace the Car Battery Peugeot 206 1.4 HDI. You'll now need to remove the battery tray. Take a socket wrench, an extender and a 10mm socket and unscrew the 3 screws holding the tray. Unclip the electrical connectors on the battery tray. Next, using a small socket wrench and a 10mm socket, unscrew the nut holding the plastic tray relay box. Disengage the relay from the battery tray. You can now remove the battery tray assembly. Using a pry bar, detach the clips from the cable sleeves attached to the metal holder on the battery tray. Using a socket wrench, an extender and a 13mm socket, unscrew the 4 screws holding the battery tray holder. Then remove the mount. Unclip the cable sleeve that hides the harness guide retaining nut. Next, using a socket wrench, an extender, a gimbal and a 13mm socket, unscrew the electrical harness guide retaining nut. Remove the nut using a magnet. You can now remove the guide from the threaded rod to gain access to its double-ended socket, which you will need to unscrew to release the negative ground. Disconnect the reverse position sensor. Loosen the stud bolts on the front wheels. Lift the front of the vehicle. We strongly suggest watching the tutorial, raising your vehicle safely before carrying out this step. Place the vehicle on the axle stands. In order to change the clutch kit on your vehicle, you must remove the wheels to gain complete access. Don't forget to slide them under the vehicle. It is now time to get under the vehicle. Changing the clutch requires to remove both drive shafts. The gearbox must therefore be bled so that the oil does not spill everywhere. To do this, we recommend watching the video How to Change the Gearbox Oil on a Peugeot 206 1.4 HDI. To remove the drive shafts, the control arm ball joint must be disengaged from the stub axle. As the components to be removed are very often seized up, don't hesitate to brush and use penetrating oil to facilitate the operation. Unscrew the control arm ball joint nut on the driver's side using a 16mm spanner, a socket wrench and a 16mm socket. Then remove the screw. On 206 models, the control arm ball joints are very difficult to remove, so we used a long crowbar to get a lot of leverage. The crowbar is attached to the end of the control arm with a metal clamp. On the body side, the crowbar rests on plastic wedges. Next, pry the control arm ball joint out of the stub axle and move the assembly aside. On the driver's side, all you have to do is remove the drive shaft from the gearbox. Remove the plastic cover under the mudguard so that you can move the drive shaft aside using a socket wrench and a 10mm socket. On the passenger side, the drive shaft must be completely removed. Start by stopping the hub from rotating by moving into 5th gear and asking someone to press the brake pedal to stop the assembly from rotating. Using a breaker bar and a 30mm socket, release the hub nut and remove it. Now remove the control arm ball joint on the passenger side using the same technique as for the driver's side control arm. You can now remove the drive shaft from the wheel hub. Using a socket wrench and an 11mm socket, unscrew the 2 screws holding the transmission bearing to the intermediate bearing so that the drive shaft can be completely removed. Loosen them sufficiently so that you can rotate the screw locking studs on the intermediate bearing. You can then pull on the drive shaft to remove it from the gearbox. Now you need to remove the starter. Start by unscrewing the nuts on the negative and positive terminals using a 30mm spanner, a socket wrench and a 10mm socket. In these images, you can see the 2 screws holding the starter in place on the engine side, which you'll need to remove using a socket wrench and an 8mm socket. Then unscrew the 3rd screw on the gearbox side. Use a magnet to remove the screw since it's difficult to access. You can now remove the starter. Now the gearbox retaining screws need to be removed. There's 7 screws to be removed. Using a socket wrench and an 8mm Allen socket, unscrew the screw located above the drive shaft enclosure hole. Repeat the same procedure with the screw located below the drive shaft enclosure hole. To gain access to the lower gearbox retaining screw, the exhaust brake must be disengaged from the catalytic converter. Spray the clamping clip screws with penetrating oil. Using a socket wrench and a 13mm socket, unscrew the clip. Move the exhaust brake aside. You can now access the lower gearbox screw, which you can unscrew using a socket wrench and an 8mm Allen socket. To remove the next screw, you need to remove the catalytic converter. Yes, you've got it right. Thank you, Peugeot engineers. Using a small socket wrench and a 10mm socket, unscrew the screws holding the heat shield in place. Remove the heat shield. Spray the clamping clip screw with penetrating oil. Next, using a socket wrench and a 13mm socket, unscrew the clip. Using a socket wrench, a gimbal and a 13mm socket, unscrew the catalytic converter retaining nut. Repeat the operation on the second retaining nut. You can now remove the catalytic converter from underneath. Next, remove the metal holder from the catalytic converter. Using a small socket wrench and a female E7 torque socket, remove the double-ended thread rod that prevents you from unscrewing the gearbox retaining screw. Using a socket wrench and the 8mm Allen socket, unscrew the gearbox retaining screw. Unscrew the last retaining screw. You can now remove the clutch cable from the clutch release fork. Then unclip the clutch cable from the cable holder. You now need to unclip the 3 gearbox control cables, which you can see here from above by prying on the ball joint using a flathead screwdriver from under the vehicle. It is now time to use a jack by the crankcase in order to rest against the engine when removing the engine mount on the gearbox side. Using a socket wrench, an extender and an 18mm socket, start by unscrewing the central screw from the gearbox buffer. Then lower the engine a few centimeters, making sure it does not pull on any part as you lower it. Next, using a socket wrench, an extender and a T40 torque socket, unscrew the 2 screws holding the engine mount in place. Remove the bracket. Using a socket wrench, an extender and a 13mm socket, unscrew the 3 nuts holding the gearbox bracket in place. Then remove the bracket. Using a socket wrench, an extender and a 13mm socket, unscrew the 2 nuts holding the electrical harness guide in place. Then move the assembly aside. On the engine side, using a socket wrench and an 8mm Allen socket, unscrew the last 2 gearbox retaining screws. The gearbox is now free. Shift it outwards to completely disengage it from the engine block before lowering it. Don't hesitate to ask for help from a friend to remove it, as it is heavy and difficult to handle. You can now view the clutch on your vehicle. Using a socket wrench and a T40 torque socket, remove the 6 screws holding the clutch to the flywheel. Remove the clutch. You can now see the flywheel. In some cases, it is crucial to change it at the same time as the clutch. If necessary, we recommend you watch our video How to Change the Flywheel on a Megane 2 1.5 DCI. The operations are virtually identical.
Okay, guys, if we can share this video with you and help you save a lot of money, it's also thanks to our partner, Mr. Auto. So, if you want to support us and buy the parts for this operation, visit their website. Okay, back to work.
You can find the ball clutch disc and housing used in the video on the Mr. Auto website and in the link in the description. Start by cleaning the flat surface of the clutch housing that is in contact with the clutch disc using some brake cleaner and a cloth. Then fit the clutch disc by positioning the part with the springs into the housing. In order to reinstall the clutch on the flywheel, the clutch disc and housing need to be perfectly centered. It is therefore imperative that you have a clutch centering tool, something you can find in the description of the video. Once the tool is properly installed, check that the disc and housing are perfectly aligned. If this is not the case, you will not be able to insert the transmission shaft into the clutch disc when fitting the clutch housing. Clean the contact surface of the flywheel with some brake cleaner and a cloth. You can see the 3 centering pins for fitting the clutch to the flywheel. Take the newly assembled part and install it on the flywheel. We strongly advise you to install brand new clutch screws. Roughly replace the screws by hand. Then tighten and stagger a Quincox pattern using a torque wrench. You can now remove the centering tool. When you change your clutch, it is also important to replace the clutch release bearing. Pull on the clutch release fork to unclip it. Remove the clutch release bearing from the fork. It's now time to clean the inside of the crankcase as it is lined with dust and particles from the old disc. Lubricate the location of the clutch release bearing and the clutch release fork ball joint. Lubricate the transmission shaft and its cavity with gear grease. But don't use too much grease because if the grease spreads out, it may affect the clutch's efficiency. You can also find the grease in the video description. You can find the ball clutch release bearing used in the video on the Mr. Auto website and in the link in the description. Install the stop of the clutch release fork and put the assembly back in its slot. Now you can put the gearbox back on. You will have to insert the transmission shaft into the clutch disc cavity. Again, you're advised to get help from a friend to handle this tricky step. Once in place, screw the 2 gearbox housing retaining screws back on. Then tighten the lower screw at the front of the vehicle. Tighten the screw of the catalytic converter. Tighten the screw behind the exhaust braid. Then tighten the screw located under the drive shaft enclosure hole on the passenger side. Tighten the screw located above the drive shaft enclosure hole on the passenger side. Finalize the tightening of the screws with a torque wrench. You can find the tightening torques under the link in the video description. Put the electrical harness guide back in place. Then screw the nuts back on. Reinstall the gearbox bracket and screw it back on. Finish off the tightening with a torque wrench. Put the gearbox buffer back in place and screw it back on, using the jack. Lift the engine block and pass the vertical screws at the gearbox bracket through the gearbox buffer. Then screw the retaining nut back on. Finish off the tightening with a torque wrench. Remove the jack. Reinsert the starter into its slot, then tighten the 2 retaining screws on the engine side. Screw the gearbox side screw back on. Finish off the tightening with a torque wrench. Screw the positive and negative terminals of the starter back on. Where the catalytic converter is located, screw the double-ended thread rod back on by hand first before finishing off using a female E7 torque socket. Put the metal holder of the catalytic converter back in place. You can now reinsert the catalytic converter into its slot. Screw the 2 catalytic converter retaining nuts back on. Put the catalytic converter clamping clip back onto the exhaust manifold using exhaust clamp pliers. Then screw the clip back on. Put the exhaust braid back onto the catalytic converter. Then put the clip back in place and screw it back on. Put the heat shield back in. Then screw it back on. Reinsert the gearbox control ball joints by simply pushing on them. Clip the electrical sheath back in. Then reconnect the reverse sensor connector. Screw the grounding screw back onto the engine using the double-ended threaded rod. Position the electrical harness guide on it. Then screw the nut back on. On the driver's side, insert the drive shaft into the gearbox. Then put the control arm ball joint back into the stub axle. Screw the control arm ball joint retaining screw back on. Finish off the tightening with a torque wrench. Put the plastic cover back in place under the mudguard. Then screw it back on. Now you need to put the drive shaft back in place on the passenger side. Slide it through the intermediate bearing and insert it into the gearbox. Once in place, reposition the locking studs on the bearing retaining screws on the intermediate bearing. Then screw them back on to secure the assembly. Reinsert the drive shaft into the hub. Then insert the control arm ball joint into the control arm. Then screw it back on. Finish off the tightening with a torque wrench. Put the hub nut back in place. To be able to screw the hub nut back on, you must stop the disc from rotating. To do this, put the car in 5th gear and ask someone to press the brake pedal. Finish off the tightening with a torque wrench. Then at the recommended clamping angle. You can now crimp the hub nut using a thin chisel. The clutch cable now needs to be reinserted into the clutch release fork. To do this, we recommend watching our video How to Change the Clutch Cable on a Peugeot 206 1.4 HDI. Put the wheels of your vehicle back on and lower it to the ground. It is now necessary to refill the oil in the gearbox. To do this, we recommend watching the video How to Change the Gearbox Oil in a Peugeot 206 1.4 HDI. Put the metal holder of the battery tray back in place. Then screw it back on. Clip the clips of the cable sleeve attached to the metal holder of the battery tray back on. Put the battery tray back in place. Put the relay box back in place. Then screw it back on. Clip the electrical connectors back onto the tray. Then screw the battery tray back on. Reinstall the battery. To do this, we recommend watching the video How to Replace the Car Battery Peugeot 206 1.4 HDI. Operation completed.
Hi, it's Theo from UseTool. I hope this video has helped you a lot in your car maintenance. We will be super grateful if you could spread the word so that we can produce even more tutorials. Simply give us a like, a comment, and hit that subscribe button. It really helps us boost the channel and help the whole community. Thanks a lot and have a great one.